Hey, welcome back everyone. Rob here from Ram Studio Comics. So today's video, I actually want to do one where we do a panel. I want to start doing more videos like this on the channel where we do an actual panel representation from a comic so that, we're kind of implementing, because it's too much to just draw people floating on the page and not interacting. And, we got to draw scenes as well, right? So basically on this one, I've already set up a basic 1-point perspective grid, and I'm going to show you the interface to Manga Studio here just because it allows you to do all this pretty easily with perspective rulers. But just so you know, this is a single vanishing point. It's just lines radiating outward from the center, and then I do some that are horizontal and vertical. They don't look horizontal or vertical because I have a tilted panel here, which adds a little bit more of a dynamic vibe to it. But it's pretty much as simple as it gets as far as perspective. So I'm not going to explain that, but what I want to do now is show you one of the scenes that I've been wanting to do. You always get these scenes where you got like a lot of techie gadgetry, right? So you got like screens everywhere. That's a real popular kind of scene setting. You might have Batman or somebody sitting there looking at all these, walls of screens. So what I want to do here is show you how I'd go about doing this off a 1-point perspective grid. So at first, I'm just going to establish a bunch of, essentially rectangles in this perspective area. So kind of, I kind of need to think about the composition as well. So I might have, some kind of like seating area for the character. So we'll say that, but we'll just kind of draw this boxed area where the character might be sitting. Okay, and then we're going to have screens going up the walls all around them. So I'm just going to throw in some basic shapes. Now notice I am angling some of it, so that doesn't look like it goes with the perspective grid. Mainly just because if I did everything with the perspective grid, it'd look pretty boring, right? So what I'm doing is just kind of imagining the angle, because it's not too hard to do with these perspective grids and rollers in the way. I might tilt some screens downward, which really doesn't make sense. Wouldn't be as functional, but we're trying to vary up the design of everything we're looking at. So sometimes you kind of throw functionality out the window. I do anyways. But again, most of the time you're going to look at it and go, well, what makes sense here? What looks correct? You might have one that's, now if it's higher up, we could say that maybe one's tilting out this way. That kind of has some function there. So we'll do that. And then we'll bring a line back and connect it to whatever kind of wall panel this might be. And we can also play with the shapes themselves. They don't all have to be rectangles. In fact, they probably shouldn't all be rectangles. They should have things like maybe a curved top or indents on the side. Anything to, again, vary it up and make it more interesting. But you see, I'm going to fly through this pretty quickly. I want to define, we'll say that this is the top edging. And notice I didn't just go for a 90-degree edging there. I thought I would incorporate an angle. Just kind of playing around with some concepts. But again, drawing these in quickly and allowing myself to see into the work as I do this. Maybe this is the way it ends up, maybe not, but just kind of introducing some things. I might do a circular kind of light. Now remember, to get a circle, you're going to do a square in perspective. You're going to crisscross your corners, things like that. Okay, so now let's kind of figure out some more of the details. We can also, I always love doing this with shots like this. I like edging the shot itself with some silhouette information. So we'll get into that, but I'm just kind of explaining the composition or whatever that I'm doing here. And then obviously we've got our panel border, something like that. Just holding shift click for that. And so now we've got this character, in this area. So it's like this confined quarters kind of thing going on. So what we'll do is we'll just have them, sitting, it's like right here. It almost looks like one of those surveillance vans or something. We've all been there, right? We've all been in the back of a surveillance van. And it's basically like that kind of idea. Like there's just techie gadgetry all over. You could really have a couple people too. So you could have one up closer. And obviously this makes it more, it adds dimension to the scene. So the moment you add things that represent real life scenarios, people, we know the size of people roughly. So what happens is it paints the picture per the can't talk today pretty quickly, because we know the approximate size of a person. So as we add this in, all the other stuff starts to relate and make sense, right? We can go, oh, okay, they're in a really confined area. They're probably claustrophobic, or at least I would be. But so they're just looking up at these screens, kind of tilt the head of this character, give them a little chair or something. And again, this all kind of adds to the design of this. And, we got to keep laying in these screens. So I always feel like the more of this you kind of overlay, the more high tech it gets and a bit clustered. But it just kind of does that for the techie effect of it. Like, wow, this must be really advanced, because there's ultimately like no room for anything but screens. You might have a few wires going from one to another, even though, in the high tech world, you probably don't even have wires. But we'll just say that this is almost the high tech world. And so things like this, maybe we do a little segments on these corner panels. These almost look like lights now. But see, I'm just roughly using the perspective to throw this stuff in place. And I'm being creative with the way I implement this stuff. So I might put a divide here, kind of thinking like showing some cross sections to this. Maybe not. Still exploring the ideas here. Or maybe there's another angle right here for, kind of like the keyboard type things. And we could throw in some other shapes. They don't all have to be rectangular. Probably shouldn't be. Again, you want to really explore different shape ideas and be creative with it. So let's find our floor, something like this. So you see, all this is, freehand. I'm not worrying about hitting every line on that perspective. And as I clean this up, I can think more about that. But for now, I just want to really get these ideas down, have fun with it. And I'm still kind of guessing. You probably noticed that, but I don't know exactly what shapes I want to see, I guess. I'm pinballing around trying to figure that out. So don't hold yourself too accountable in the beginning, is what I'm saying. So if you basically get to this level of your work and you're like, well, I just can't think of nothing, don't scrap it. Don't walk away and say, well, I just don't know what I'm doing yet. Just keep scribbling is like my best bit of advice for that. Keep scribbling, keep changing shapes. Sometimes you can jump back and forth from detail to simplistic areas, simplifying areas. Sometimes I think that helps a little bit, but it's basically just keep adding information. The sketch will kind of unfold a little bit, as long as you don't get too caught up in the frustration of it, because it does occur, right? You get a little frustrated when you can't think of what to do where. So let's try this. Let's try a little bit of, because this is looking somewhat boring in certain areas. I might even do something like this, where we got another kind of panel that comes off at a different angle. Maybe we see some of the side of this before we see the silhouette of this. So let's try something like that. And about at this stage, we can start erasing this back and exploring it a little bit more. So I'll make a copy of this. We'll call this the very rough sketch. Now, typically this would just be my thumbnail stage of whatever I'm doing. But now I want to jump in here with a little bit more conviction, I guess, and start to refine some of this and explore some more ideas. Okay, so now let's add a little bit more detail. And not too much, though. We want to make sure that we don't get too caught up in details, and then this takes too awfully long, right? So that's another problem with comics, with drawing in general, it's just too easy to get caught up into what you're doing and then yeah, miss the mark and not get things done on time. Definitely guilty of that one myself there, folks. So just so you know, that's why I can talk about it, because I've lived it. Okay, so checking my perspective, I wanted to put this line going down like this, and we can toggle that perspective on and kind of correct things. So let's say something like this. I think I want to add this shape that's dropping down in the middle right here. Do away with this little circular thingamabob right there, but I just want a little bit more interesting shape right across here. So that's what you see me doing there. That was my stomach gurgling. I must be getting nervous or hungry or both. I don't know. Okay, so let's see here. Let's go ahead and soft erase this back, and let's start to develop this crazy futuristic room. It's kind of what I'm picturing. And again, I want there to be some noticeable silhouettes here. I don't know what it is about this. I just really like the effect of some basic shapes that are silhouetted and closer. And we can do a couple things with this. We can start off with a solid shape like this. See, it might just be easier for me to, or faster for me to create a quick selection here. You're probably thinking, why don't you just fill that in, Rob? Well, because it gets a different look, and I want it to look like pencils, not inks yet. Call me crazy. Wouldn't be the first time. Okay, so yeah, I'm just basically filling this in painstakingly, and I don't know why, but when I'm recording with QuickTime, the brush can't keep up with the speed of the Robster as I draw this in. I'm faster than the computer, if you believe that. But only when I'm using QuickTime. Other than that, it's pretty quick. Okay, so there's that silhouette, and you can see I didn't really think through it a whole lot. But then what you can do is come back and you can, get in some other shapes. Again, I need to keep the perspective in mind. It's funny how much it makes you realize how bad your idea of perspective is when you do this. But you could do a few negative shapes, buttons, whatever you can think of here. It'd probably make more sense. Let me try this. Since we are doing a silhouette, just the edges of the buttons, something like that. Yeah, I don't know. Let's just go with the silhouette for now. I'm all confused here, folks. Okay, but I do like it because it frames off the shot. So I will use this in some way. I just haven't figured out the shapes that I want to see yet. The side's a little darker. So yeah, something like that, and then maybe a couple little wires or something. Because again, we're not too far into the future, so we're gonna get a few little wires and stuff like that here. Okay, so there's that. So there's our quick framing, and now we'll work back into this. So again, it's real easy to just draw rectangles, but let's just try to make little changes as we go. So for instance, right here, we're just going to round that edge over. Nothing too groundbreaking, but something a little bit different than the rectangle we see there. And we got to kind of guess at this angle because it's not fitting to our perspective. Now, you can keep in mind that if you're trying to make this absolutely correct, you can find your horizon line and you can draw this back to a new vanishing point. I'm not going to be that overly concerned with it. As you can see here, I'm just kind of going for it. And then I've got the power of Control Z or Command Z to go back. So I'll change the back line of this. So just so it looks a little different. I might have a tiny little edge here, nothing too dramatic because, you know, you got to think about how futuristic things are even right now. Or I guess you wouldn't call it futuristic because it's right now. Duh. But things basically almost have no bezel anymore. They're becoming very, everything's becoming very flush screen. So you got to be careful, I think. And if you're trying to make something that looks more modern than today, you really probably wouldn't even have this much thickness on a device. But we'll say that this is, you know, acceptable or whatever. And then on this side of it, you obviously can't just take it to a full silhouette because you'll lose this shape, but you could just do some cool little shading lines like this. So you can do that plane change and you can still keep your silhouette right there. So, okay, like that. A couple more wires come off the back of this maybe. Not a big deal. We could also think about what's on the screen. So we could have like some, you know, some graphs, and, you know, you'll see these kind of things where it's like a line and an angle coming off and a circle with a circle with a tiny circle. I don't know. You could just play around with different shapes on here, or you could just go for the glare effect, which is kind of like, you know, some swirling lines, fill in some area, do some more lines, whatever you want to do there. Just to keep this video not too awfully long, I'm just going to go with the basic, you know, kind of graphs and lines, just because it's a little bit quicker. So again, it's almost like they're reading data. You know, you could have strands, what looks like strands of code. Hopefully that looks like strands of code anyways. I think it does. Maybe you don't. That's starting to look like post-it notes. You could have like a little solar system thing going on there. I don't know. Whatever. Just play around with it. Obviously my perspective's off again. I'm going to fix that. All right, so now I'm probably going to have to time-lapse this because unfortunately my detailing skills take a little while. So, and I tend to detail a little bit faster when I'm not yapping. But all I'm going to do here is try to figure out these shapes. And I'm also going to add in like little bits of, you know, depth. And again, I want to fight the urge to make all of this look too overly rectangular and boxy. So I'm going to keep adjusting these shapes as I go in the hopes of making it look a little bit more, you know, essentially modern. So see, I just keep adding these angle lines. And you can see I'm not working with my perspective, so I could really be skewing this quite a bit. So let me do that. Let me make sure it's at least there. Because, like I said, if I don't have it on, I'll probably make some horrendous mistakes here. So again, just kind of shifting some of this design as I go. Okay, I don't know if I like this particular shape. I don't know why there would be kind of this hood piece over it, but you know, you kind of have to do this anyways. You got to play with these concepts and say, well, what if, you got to do a lot of what ifs. You know, what if this was a different kind of techy little gadget? What if this had some design elements off to the side of this? You know, whatever. You also have to weigh in, does it help convey this idea, this storyline that you're trying to illustrate? You know, does it fit the narrative, and is it going to cost a tremendous amount of time to illustrate it? So always keeping an eye on the clock, basically. So another way we can do this is obviously simplify with thicker lines. So, you know, that's a pretty common technique, is to just, you know, start thickening up certain lines. You can even start with thicker lines and then work down to your thinner lines. I have a hard time doing that sometimes, but that is probably a good way to really not spend too much time, an absorbent amount of time on things that you shouldn't. Just like the old school comics, they were a lot of heavy lines and less detail, and I'm sure those books met their deadlines, came out on time. I would hope so. So yeah, so now let's go ahead and kick this into time-lapse because it's just going to take a while. I doubt anybody's going to want to sit here for hours or I don't know if it'll take hours, probably an hour while I render this out. So with that, let's head over to the next portion or the time-lapse and press on. Okay, so there you have it. That's, you see it kind of went from our starting point of just a perspective grid to this right here, which would be considered a rough thumbnail, to this right here where there's a little bit of refinement, a little bit of the concept going on, but you see still quite a bit of change from here. And this did take me about an hour and a half to draw that. So you can see if we zoom up, it's still pretty rough, but it's tight enough where I could go back through and ink it. So now what I would do is I would blue line this, grab my G pen, work on a new layer over top, and I would just jump in here and start giving it one more pass of detail, basically inking it, but then cleaning up anything I can while still retaining, some flow to it and a bit of speed, because I want to make sure, if this is one panel, I've got to make sure that it doesn't take, well, really I should probably be able to complete that in an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. It just depends on the size of the panel, the importance of it in relationship to the page, things like that. So, but this is more of an establishing shot with the background and stuff like that. So it's safe to say that I could probably spend, a couple hours on this. But then the rest of the panels would have to be maybe, isolated areas like the face and expressions and not a whole lot of background. Just depends. So anyways, let me know what you think of this particular lesson. If you like these types of videos, what other types of panels you would like to see covered. I'm going to be sure to make more of these because, again, I think it's really important to practice this as comic artists and, have a nice range so that we can do the storytelling we need to. And yeah, so I'm going to try a bunch of different scenes and panels. I'll be bringing you that, so be on the lookout for those. And make sure to comment in the section below. Let me know what else you like. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe, like, hit that notification bell button, whatever it is. And thanks very much for the support of the channel. You guys are awesome. So as always, keep drawing, keep having fun, and I will talk to you soon.